Get to the bigger point of this video. If you are someone who is Gen Z or millennial, you were raised with a lot of this feminism ideology, especially if you went to public school. You were told of this kind of stuff and your privilege and patriarchy and you only achieve this because you're a man and this and that about the system. So a lot of men who have worked hard to improve themselves, whether it's working hard with a job, whether it's getting into a university, whether it's building their body physically, whether it's getting into a trade, whether it's getting into the military, because I know as well many people who are very successful after the military with a lot of the incentives and stuff. In a way, they're just shunned because of this kind of toxic feminism ideology, which ultimately is just, it's not even about equality. It's just a way to just degrade and talk down to men. It's just from miserable people. I think anyone with common sense would be all for women being treated fairly. But we've seen the remnants of this. We've seen now a lot of men feel out of place and resentful, quite frankly, towards really any sort of established order a lot of the time. And I think that's a big part of what's to blame for it. My thing is this. The amount of heroic, good, decent men that just go under the radar is astounding. It's easy to pick one extreme and ride home with it. But no one wants to talk about the man that is just trying his best, which is most people, by the way, to support themselves, support their close circle of friends, or support their family. It's such a beautiful thing when you see a father and a daughter, or a father and a son. That father raising the kid to their best of their ability, which, by the way, no parent is perfect. But even I've seen it with family members, fathers, uncles, grandfathers. The eternal stress that they put up with for years, even decades, and had to keep in silence. They couldn't be open about it because they'd be seen as weak. They'd be seen as emasculated. And I've seen some points where you can see they're almost at a breaking point. It almost boils over. Anyone who was lucky enough to have been blessed enough to grow up with perhaps a grandfather or both grandfathers or a father in your life probably knows what I'm talking about. And I think back to even when I was younger and all the internal battles that I was facing and dealing with at the lowest points in my life. It ultimately took me hitting rock bottom to really change things around. And how I had no real support network, no real outlet for it. And again, the systems, the schools, the faculty, they wouldn't take it seriously. That's just the truth. They wouldn't. When it comes to things like therapy, I'm not opposed to the idea at all, although you got to make sure they don't put you on stuff. You got to make sure it's a reputable therapist, because I've also heard not so good things about therapy. But it's important for men to have an outlet. And I wanted to make this video because I think a lot of us right now are struggling with not only the increased stress, which could be combined with things like the price of living, things like social media, all different kinds of societal pressures, things like perhaps a toxic friendship, toxic relationship, a certain grievance or loss in your life, and how we really don't know how to utilize those things. We really don't have an outlet for them, or perhaps any support network. So I just want to say that we need to, number one, bring back brotherhood, normalize that. I haven't had the, which I could say a fortune or unfortunate. In a way, it's fortunate because now I have a better keen eye for it. But I've had the displeasure of coming across some very toxic people, very toxic friendships where these are not people you want to share things with. They would perhaps use it against you because they were so insecure. They were people that didn't have your best interest to begin with. And it's important to find people who really do have your back. And by all means, if you find those people, keep them close. Keep them very close, because seemingly more and more those people seem to become harder and harder to find. But what gets me is just this whole societal issue that I see, where as I've gotten older, which both older with age and also older with wisdom, with getting to know people, with experience, seeing so many good, decent men who have just suffered for years. For example, things like custody battles, things like divorces, throwing their whole lives in shambles, being in financial ruin, tens of thousands of dollars in debt over stuff like that. It's really not talked about enough. I believe one of the biggest problems facing people, especially young adults, is the breakdown of the nuclear household. And what's going to come with that is decent women and decent men coming together and raising families. That's what it's going to take. And we should not be trying to shun decent men. We should not be trying to make them feel like they're out of place. We really need to bring back and standardize the form of decency. Again, I was born in the 90s, so I'm not someone who lived or at least grew up my prominent years in the 90s or 80s or even 70s. But I've heard from people that times were very different back then in terms of dynamics like I'm talking about, and in terms of the way people were treated. And even in my lifetime, my almost 30 years of being on this earth, I've seen a big change over the past, especially I would say 10 to 15 years in this kind of stuff. Like I said, around 2015, when this kind of feminism ideology was really big and pushed in the schools and in college and in the media. And when men were really being shamed for being themselves, for being ultimately who they are. Now I'll say this about masculinity, because I think this is something that needs to be said. A man's not the one who's the loudest in the room. A man's not the one who has the biggest muscles or has the tattoos. A man's ultimately the one who does the right thing, who's decent, who has values. And to me, that's something that should be celebrated. It shouldn't be shunned or it shouldn't be shamed. We can't help what happened however many decades or hundreds of years ago. And let's say, for sake of argument, towards a lot of the people who are pushing this kind of feminist stuff, let's say for sake of argument that there were some mistreatments and horrible things that happened in the past. Or they were perhaps a small percentage of men who might have done certain things that are terrible. The solution can't be worse than the problem. If you're going to shame and make so many men feel out of place, feel resentful towards society, any sort of established order, anything, it's going to create a culture of men who are just going to be, quite frankly, very angry, who are going to be very resentful, who are not going to want to play by the rules. That's the truth. And with this male loneliness epidemic, with this, or as they say, with this whole thing with male loneliness, the people who are ultimately going to suffer the most are going to be the women. Because I've heard people say how women are going their own way, women don't want to have kids. That's all fine and dandy, but I've known plenty of women who are nearing the age of 40, who are in their 30s, who wish they would have had kids when they were younger. But, of course, just because of biology, their biological clock is expiring. They can only be fertile for so long, or at least without the likelihood of certain complications. And a lot of them, because of this kind of instilled disdain towards men, a lot of the stuff that is promoted now, which is degeneracy, which is very lousy behavior, I don't think sleeping around is good for men or women. I think it's good to be loyal to one partner. But the reality is, this whole thing with women going their own way, you have to understand something. Men can handle loneliness better than a lot of people, I think, give them credit for. Coming from someone who has been alone for a big part of my life, locked myself in a box where I had to really get everything together. I built my body physically with weightlifting. I ended up doing all different forms of training. I ended up getting stuff together with work, with eventually going into community college and then university. Men can handle loneliness better than a lot of people give them credit for. And from my experience and what I've seen, I've noticed more women suffering with the idea of loneliness than men. I think a lot of men are kind of fed up just because of the stuff I've been talking about. I think it's something a lot of people don't really seem to understand. They think every man is lonely and this, that. And to the men out there who, because I've seen this too, and it's not something I agree with, a lot of men who are so desperate for female, well, I shouldn't say a lot of men, because I don't think this is a super common thing, but people who are basically basing their whole life around female attention, female interaction. And that's what people think this male loneliness epidemic is about. It's not. It's not about women at all. Again, that's what people seem to not understand. And for anyone out there who is a man, who has been bullied or harassed or felt out of place, I'll tell you what, one of the best things that I ever did at a young age was getting into martial arts. Not only are you going to learn discipline and self-defense and exercise, you're going to meet some amazing people through that community. I've met some very cool people through martial arts, and a lot of people would look at the outside and think, oh, well, these are insecure guys who are just trying to learn how to beat people up. It's like, no, when you train, when you know how your body can be utilized and stuff like that, when you really know ultimately what can be done to someone, quite frankly, by these kind of techniques, you have a lot more respect for things like altercations. Most people I know that are really talented, whether it's boxers, whether it's jiu-jitsu guys, whether it's wrestlers, whether it's kickboxers, they're the last people that are going to go out and start problems. They're very secure in themselves. Just kind of a tangent there. But men should never fall into doing things for the approval of women. When it comes to look maxing stuff, because I've seen some kind of stuff back and forth, I have a personal friend who's a popular YouTuber, and I actually agree with him on this, that men should strive to be the best version of themselves, but not for women, not for other people, not for social media, for their own self-fulfillment, for their own peace of mind. I've seen studies on this where men who are seen as easy targets are the ones that just don't take care of themselves. People who just seem like they just are all over the place. And again, my thing is this. I'm not going to shame anyone for not wanting to have a clean pair of shoes on. If that's your prerogative, by all means. If that's going to have you have your own peace of mind, then by all means do it. You should be confident in yourself no matter what. But for me personally, I noticed that things like having on a cleaner pair of shoes, when it's an option. I understand some people in financial predicaments, it might be harder than others. I would say there's things like I've sometimes been able to find good deals at thrift stores, places like Ross. I've been able to find some pretty decent pairs of shoes for around $10 to $20. But having on a clean pair of shoes, having on a decent fragrance, this kind of stuff, I personally feel better about myself. Now, I'm not saying it's going to fix depression. I'm not saying it's going to fix anxiety, because I think a big mistake a lot of people make too is they look at the escapism and the escape and this and that, and they get the highs off of the new shoes, the new this, the new that, the playing this video game, doing that, when ultimately it shouldn't be used to mask the problem. But guys, I just see way too many men who not only are struggles a lot of the time just not taken very seriously, but a big need for brotherhood. a big need for loyalty and honor, as mentioned in that song. A big need for just ultimately having each other's back. Because I think back even to some movies that I've seen where you have two men from completely different backgrounds, from different mothers, who have that loyalty and honor and brotherhood, who treat each other like brothers. And quite frankly, it's such a beautiful thing to see. And it's something that just seems to have become less and less and less common. Think about it this way. We could say the world is competitive. I think there's obviously healthy competition that's meant to drive people and together push them forward. For example, me and my friends sometimes in the gym, we'd push each other to hit PRs. But remember this, even with a PR, even if you're PRing on bench, you still have to have a spotter. You're not doing that all on your own. Whereas I've also seen a very toxic competition. I've seen men even competing with each other over the same girl, over trying to get the same girl, or all different kinds of stuff. A lot of undermine just kind of jealousy and envy, and that's not good. We need to bring back the brotherhood that I'm talking about, guys. But anyway, thank you so much for the video. And if any of you guys have dealt with these kind of struggles, these kind of eternal battles, just know you're not alone. Just know that there are many men just like you. And with that, we all need support networks. We all need outlets. And ultimately, we all need to do what's going to fulfill our own peace of mind. Thank you so much for viewing the video, guys. Have a great day.